and welcome. We're so glad to have everyone with us here today. We are thrilled to be able to present to you Civic Inquiries for Foundations of Democracy. And this is a partnership with the Center for Civic Education and the Library of Congress. And we are thrilled to have two of our master teachers with us this evening to lead you in a lesson demonstration. So very quickly, I'll just tell you, I'm Kelly Reichert. I'm here with the Center for Civic Education, and I'm delighted to be with these two wonderful ladies, and I'll have them introduce themselves.
Okay, I'm Lori Risler. I am a C's mentor for the Center for Civic Education, as well as on faculty in the education department at Westfield State University. I come with an elementary education background.
And hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Brown, and I am a We the People teacher. I am also a C's associate coordinator, so I help to direct the grant for the Northeast region. And with Lori, I write elementary curriculum that's based on inquiry and primary sources, and we have a blast doing that. And we're so excited to share with you some really cool lessons today. So welcome to everybody. It's awesome to see everybody on this Tuesday evening.
Okay, and so I would like to just let everyone know what we put as our goals here at the Center for Civic Education. Our mission is to promote an enlightened and responsible citizenry committed to democratic principles and actively engaged in the practice of democracy. So we know that we're all here with that idea of lifting up civic education, and we honor you for spending this time with us this evening. We know you have so many things happening, and this is such a busy time of the year, but we appreciate you joining in this mission with us this evening. For those of you who don't know, the center has been around since 1965, and not only are we a national reach, we have an international reach, and nearly 50 million folks have been a part of our programs over the years. And in 1987, we started to produce our We the People textbook, which many of you may recognize as the We the People Simulated Congressional Hearings program. And for those of you who don't know about it, stay on afterwards and I'd be happy to share more information. But tonight we're really focused on our civic inquiries, which are purposefully written for elementary, but can definitely be modified for middle or high school. All right, and with that, we are practicing our goals of providing high quality instructional materials with our We the People program, our Project Citizen program, and with these civic inquiries that we're going to be sharing with you this evening. And our goal here, working with the Library of Congress, teaching with primary sources, we have been able to create civic inquiries for the foundations of democracy. So working with very basic principles of authority, justice, privacy, and responsibility, we feel like these are really great entry points for all of our learners, and that can be, again, differentiated between the grade bands. So tonight you're going to get to a look at how we have approached this with these four foundations. And just a quick overview, here at the center, we are following the 5E model for inquiry, where we are working through engaging our students and moving them to the explore phase, where they're actually doing the investigations themselves, having time for explaining, where they're having these civic conversations with one another. Moving the students into elaborate, where they're able to take their new learning and apply that, whether it be a simulation or a scenario, and then wrapping up that portion of the activity with an evaluate. So there's some self-reflection, assessment time, and that can also be the time where there's project-based activities and learning that are happening. And so you're actually going to get to see these lessons in action.
Okay, well, thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. And I just want to say again, sort of a huge kudos to folks. I too was at school all day today and then ran around and got here to present. I just saw Christopher in the chat saying that this is his third Zoom this evening. So, that's a lot going on. And so the fact that you joined us, we want to make good use of your time tonight. And so we're really excited. Lori and I, alongside Kelly, had a fantastic time developing these lessons. And really, we are so excited to share them with you and then have you explore them afterwards. Our plan for tonight is to kind of give you the what and why about the foundations of democracy and why do these. Also, we want to talk about inquiry with primary sources and how important that can be with your students. It's just exciting work to do. We also want to show you like what can you expect in these lessons. And then at the end, we're actually going to take a jump in and actually look at one of the lessons a little bit more close up. So you get an opportunity to a little bit of the experience that students will actually get when they do this. So the first 15 minutes or so will kind of take you through the series itself. And then, like I said, you'll get a chance to participate a little bit. So as Kelly mentioned, we have 4 foundations of democracy. Each is a separate lesson, and they each have at least 2 days that you can spend with students. One of the really nice things about it is they're in Google, and so you can adjust for what you need for your students. I'm actually a high school teacher. I could use these with my students because they're primary source based and inquiry based. So really think about it. If you're a middle school teacher, if you're a high school teacher, these are really accessible and fantastic to use as well as for your elementary learners. So really just hopefully you'll have a chance to explore. So as Kelly mentioned, we focused on privacy, authority, responsibility, and justice for these lessons. And Lori's going to tell us in a couple of minutes about the kind of elements that are in the lesson. But I thought I would just give you an idea of, in addition to kind of exploring some primary sources around an inquiry question about each of these themes, to give you some examples. As students dig deeper in the lesson in privacy, they get to explore some of the rules about privacy that the Supreme Court has established. They also get to explore the idea of a reasonable expectation of privacy. So we'll see kind of what that might look like. In our authority lesson, students get to kind of connect authority to their own lives, but they also get to explore authority through the concept of social contract and primary sources that connect back to John Locke and the social contract. In our responsibility lesson, students get to learn about both individual responsibilities and why they're important, and then also civic responsibilities. And so really kind of digging deeper into whom we actually have responsibilities, including ourselves, but also our communities. And this last one on justice is really quite interesting because students get to look at justice from 3 different angles. So they get to look at distributive justice, they get to look at corrective justice, and they get to look at procedural justice and really try to figure out what those things mean and how they look in school and also in scenarios in society, the way that they see it. So really connecting back to students, but also trying to expand their civic, constitutional, and government knowledge about these things. Okay, so why foundations of democracy? So one of the things that I love to talk about is the idea of civic virtue and these foundations of democracy as being so important to having our social contract actually function. And so one of the things that's really cool about looking at principles with is they get to understand the principles that underlie the social contracts that we have in our lives, right? The girding for this. And so if you think about it, students can think about social contract as, our political system in America, but they can also think about it for their own classroom. Like, why is authority and justice and responsibility and privacy important in our own classrooms, in our homes, in our communities? And so these principles can hit home for students in so many ways and actually help you build classroom community. And that's really exciting. So these lessons are based on primary sources and inquiry questions. So every single lesson has a single question that students are working to unfold and answer throughout the lesson. And so you can see here, this is the one for justice. Is this just? Students start by looking at a report card. but they get to unfold it throughout and think about what justice actually means. And so we have an inquiry question for each. And the primary sources themselves are awesome to work with. So for those of you who haven't spent much time in the Library of Congress, Lori and I have spent a long time really working heavily with their collections. And primary sources are sources that come from the time period that's being studied. They're objects, they're text, but our lessons really start with these photographs, these images that students can really engage with and use as evidence to actually answer the inquiry question. So it's really exciting for students because they can actually handle the images, they can look at them, they can explore. And then the inquiry itself, many of you have probably used inquiry, but not everybody uses it in social studies. It's tended to find itself more in science over the years, but social studies, it's so important. It's the work that historians do. And so they're really looking at questions and trying to use primary and secondary sources to answer those questions. And so students are actually trying to solve or answer this question by digging into primary sources that they'll explore throughout the whole lesson. And just one more piece about the inquiry, like why primary sources and inquiry are so important. This is something that Lori and I and the center are working really hard to commit to because it offers so many things for such a diverse group of students. So first of all, the idea that they're looking at a source, connecting it to a question, developing a claim, backing it with evidence, these are encouraging things like critical thinking, right? Increasing engagement because students are actually starting from multiple access points, but everybody can look at an image and they can really engage. So there's accessibility, engagement, active learning. Students can bring multiple viewpoints. We can all look at the same picture and see something that is very different. And in general, just having practices that allow for these entry points on multiple levels really lend themselves to a culturally responsive lens. And that is incredibly important because together students can uncover and discover as they're working through these primary sources. So the other piece is that depending on where your students are at, you can really differentiate with inquiry. So the same inquiry that fourth graders might do can also be done by 12th graders. It really is kind of an amazing tool that you can use.
So what can you expect? What are the resources that are going to be available to you when you open this up later on? First and foremost, there'll be a slideshow. All the slides are prepared and the notes are there. There's an extensive lesson plan that includes not just sort of the flow of the lesson, but as well as the social, emotional, and culturally responsive practices that are embedded. You'll have primary source sets that you can engage with your students, but then again, use in other places in your classroom. Each lesson, you'll find lots of full participation activities so that you know all your students are engaged and actively learning. The student activity handouts are there, as well as some extension activities. I think one of the things that Kelly said that's really important is, again, they're all in Google. And as educators, you know that everyone comes into your classroom with a different set of abilities and goals and skills, and you can scaffold them as appropriate for the needs, individual learning needs or language needs of the students in your classroom. So we have the 5 E's, and that's what you're going to see in each one of these lessons. And so we're going to take a really quick look at those now, and then we're actually going to dig in and actually do some of this work together later. So we begin with engage. What does this look like? So when students come in, they're actually going to be presented with an image because images have that ability to be almost universally accessible for all students. They're going to be engaged. They're going to investigate something, and they're coming at it at this point with just their own personal experience. How are they going to engage with this? Do they know what this is? What makes them say that? And so you've got your students talking about a picture with no need for background knowledge. And you as a teacher now are gathering what they do know and what they don't know about what they're looking at.
And what's exciting about this is that we don't expose the inquiry
Oh,
question in the beginning. So they have no
I'm going to tell
idea
them later.
what it's going to be.
And then students begin to explore. They're given some information. They use it to help them explore these primary sources in a deeper way. They really dig in. There's some kinesthetic activity. So they're moving and engaging with these primary sources and really doing raw analysis of the sources. And they're making observations at this stage and making predictions, but again, without sort of a frame yet. That's developing. So now students have a chance to sort of share what they're learning. They get to share their understanding with one another as well as with you as the teacher. And they also are making those personal connections too, to their own lived experiences and how these big ideas connect with their daily lives. So once they've done that, they can really dig back in. They can start to use and apply what they've learned to new situations, to new theories, new things, and they get to start making full claims and evidence at this point. And you can see that they look different in each lesson. There's many options within lessons, different ways for students to start to elaborate on their thinking and where they're developing those things. And then they get to actually take a step back and reflect on their own thinking. And this is such an important skill for students to be able to think about their process and their own skill development. And how are they progressing? Are they able to ask their own questions? Can they start to make those real world connections? And we know that when students begin to reflect on their own thinking, they're also beginning to move their skills and move their learning into their long-term memory. And so that's what this essentially process is. And we do it over and over and over again until they build those skills. So we engage them in those hands-on open sorts. They explore with close readings using lots of different strategies of primary sources. They get to explain, answering inquiry questions based on evidence. And then, right, importantly, listening to the fact that maybe their peers have different answers that are also supported by that very same primary source. They get to elaborate, presenting historical arguments using claim evidence reasoning strategies. And then again, have that process about reflecting on their own thinking and self-reflection.
Okay, so that's just a brief overview of what the lesson actually looks like. So it really follows that 5E model. You may use a different inquiry model, but they're all very similar, where you draw students in, you have them really investigate those primary sources, and then they draw claims, they use their evidence to support those claims, and then they have a chance to really reflect and think about the process and dig deeper if they want to. So we're going to take you in a minute to actually play around a little bit in this, but we do want to encourage you. We'll re-put up, or we'll put this QR code up back at the end and make sure to share it with you folks. But these are the 4 lessons that will be part of the series. And we hope that when you're done, you'll be interested enough that you'll go in and you'll actually explore. So that's our quick overview. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to jump in a little bit. So we're going to ask you to open your chat. So if you don't have your chat open, just to open your chat, because we're going to dig in a little bit and take you through just a couple of these activities. And we're going to ask you to put on both your teacher and your student hat at times, so that you get a chance to experience a little taste of this as your students might, but also think about what your students might need as a part of this.
So we start with that engage. Imagine your students have just come back from whatever they had right before your social studies class, and they get settled in and you say, okay, everybody line up at the door. And they do, because, right, that's what our students are going to do. They're accustomed to that, and they're going to get up and line up at the door. And then we're going to say, okay, have a seat. They're going to be a little confused, but they're going to sit down. Because remember, we haven't really told them yet at this point what the lesson's about. It's this idea of discovery and wonder and a little bit of, what's happening here. So they're going to do that. They're going to go back and they've gotten up and they're moved. And when they come back to their seats, they're going to be a bunch of images. They're going to be invited to lay them out and investigate these images by moving them around, trying to figure out what these images show. Like, what is this I'm even looking at? Think about that first image we looked at today. Your students might not know what that phone booth was. And we're going to invite them to start making connections. Like, how do these things connect to one another? Why am I looking at these? And so in this case, we can't do that here because I can't hand you all things, but we can play a little bit. Again, you've got your chat open. So the first question is, what do you see? Just real quick, write down a quick observation. Teacher hat or student hat. What do you notice first? What do you see?
Signs, workers, people, photos of people, uniforms, jobs, uniforms, people in careers, civic activities, photos of people working, black and white pictures, black and white photos, service workers, jobs, groups of people.
Oh, see, this is how we know they're social studies teachers. They're all in.
I know. Service work. If I'm skipping you, it's just because it's going so fast. First responders, different career positions.
Ferris wheel.
Ferris wheel, civil service workers.
Give them another question, Kelly.
History. All right, here's another question.
And then we ask students, what connections can you make between the images? Like, if you're going to group these or give the group a title, like, how might you group some of these? One group, many groups? You can use the numbers if that's easier. I might group 1 and 4 because, but what connections can you make between any of these?
Making people safer, people in positions of authority. Let's see, these can be my parents doing their job. Community workers, people who help other people work, depictions of caring, jobs, service, people in uniform. Some pictures look like they're in the past, while others more present. Uniform, safety, leaders, service, volunteer work, my role in society, community service, service work, civic virtue, people in service, jobs, civil servants. Awesome. Yeah. Heroes.
So, if you can't tell, you're engaged. So that must mean it's your turn, Kelly. What's after engage?
Well, that's when we start to explore. And so as Lori said, all that happened and the kids have no idea what we're looking at yet, right? You had a little hint because we already talked about authority, that it might be connected to that. And somebody dropped that word when we were doing it. But this would be the point at which you would bring in the inquiry question. Okay, so who has authority over me? And so this is the chance for students to get kind of saying like, oh, somehow these images are connected to this question. So then we can bring students back to that first activity and we can think about when they first lined up in front of the class, right? Who had authority in that situation? And again, students may or may not even know what that word means, right? But you could ask questions. You could say, well, why did you do it? Why did you go to the door? What happened there? And so you have that kinesthetic activity that's kind of etched in their heads that gets them to begin to think about maybe what authority actually is. So then students get a little bit more information. So learning vocabulary in context is so incredibly important, right? Not just teaching the vocabulary, but actually asking students connected to it. So what is it? What would it be like if students didn't do what the teacher asks? Right? Do you think you would learn in a classroom where there was no one in charge? Why or why not? So we have these questions that are very connected to students and their thinking, right? Students can have some really rich thoughts about these questions. They could have some funny answers too, but they really will be able to think about that. Then we work in a definition, right? But always partnered with these images to help students think about, okay, it's the right to use power to influence or control the behavior of others. Okay, well, that's a word, the definition that we can work from, but let's break it down more, right? We're exploring. So what does that look like, right? What does that feel like? What does it sound like? Some of you probably use graphic organizers like this all the time to do vocabulary, but this helps, right? And students already have seen, well, I know these images somehow connect to authority. And so there's a connection they can start to unfold what is authority and why is it important by thinking about that vocabulary development, and we provide graphic organizers for that. Then, we give students a little information, right? How do people actually get authority? It's not just power, it's the permission to use it, right? So sometimes we vote for people to get authority. Sometimes people choose a job that gives them authority, like we do as teachers, right? And sometimes the law gives parents, for example, authority, right? And so all of these things are ways that people get that permission to have power over other people. And then you'll see, and I'm not going to read through all these slides because you get to explore them later. But what we get to see here is that we unfold a little bit more, like what's the difference between power and authority? And this gives some basic ideas about that, but also provides students with an example, right? A classmate telling this boy he could not use the slide is an example of using power without authority. But a teacher telling the boy that he could not stand up on the slide is an example of using power with authority. And so you can also put in your own examples because it's in Google. And so you can decide that you might have a better example for your own classroom or something to that effect that you could use here. But this explore stage is really getting them to explore, what does this term mean? What is the principle? And how does it actually connect to our lives? And Holly, I saw that you asked about individual use or group work. You can really decide and differentiate. We intended these to be group discussions as students are looking, but the lesson plan would obviously allow for, depending on your situation, to use it as you would want to. And I think I'm handing it over.
Yeah. So, students have explored, they've gotten this new information, they're putting it all together. Now there's a chance to start to explain all this. And to do it though, we go back and we look at those same images again, and we revisit them with new knowledge and new learning and new questions. And so we go back to those same primary sources. And now we're like, okay, now we know this is about authority. And who has authority in this picture now that I'm looking at it with that lens? And what role? Is it the law? Is it their job? What is giving them authority? And then how does their having authority help society? And having students, talk about that with one another and really suss that out is really powerful. And the images help them do that. And then they can continue to think about, now take it back to myself. Who has authority over me in my life? And, which of these images maybe would your students connect with? How might that person have authority over your student? Why does this person have authority? And why do we choose as a society to give that power? What is the benefit to society? So, you can really dive in, letting students make their own personal connections to these. And I suspect you'll also hear some people that we don't have images of here as kids start to brainstorm in this area. So this is a great opportunity for them to begin to explain to one another, as well as you as a teacher getting some feedback on where they are in their understanding of the terms up to this point.
So then we move on to the elaborate stage. And again, I practice inquiry every day in my classroom with my students. And one of the really cool things about inquiry is it's almost like you're sort of like peeling back the layers of things. So you'll notice these same images keep coming up. We start with them, we end with them, but we're unfolding and we're sort of, revealing different layers to these images as we go through. And so we learned a little bit more, students explored a little bit more, and now they can begin to dig a little bit deeper, right? Why? Why do we give people authority, right? There's a reason why. And helping students kind of understand, like, why does the teacher have authority in the classroom? Why do, parents or caregivers or guardians have authority in the home? Why does the crossing guard have authority? These are really important questions. And the more students think about it, the more they understand why we have rules, right? Like, why do we have these rules in school? So there's the bigger part about society and government, but there's also the part about your own community in the classroom. And so digging deeper and elaborating, like, what would happen if there were no rules in society? And one of the nice things about this is if you have 20 minutes to teach social studies, you can have a quick conversation about this. But imagine if you had 20 minutes to spend on this slide, right? You could think about the fact that, like, okay, let's look at the traffic slide. What are the rules here that people are following? What if we had no rules for the road? Think about the ways in which students could explore an image, right? And think about, what if there were no rules and this young man here who clearly wants to be playing baseball could play baseball all night long? Right? What would be the effect of that, and why do we have that? So there's just like short and longer versions that you can do with these images, and there's so much to get from them that we're just really excited that we found them to share with you in this lesson. So I mentioned to you earlier when I was doing the overview at the beginning that in this authority one, we also have a chance to go back to some founding documents that influenced the founding. And so having this sort of vocabulary pit stop to talk about the state of nature and social contract is really fun, because we can talk about what the social contract looks like in our classroom, but also for our government, and why we would bother to give people authority in that process. And so again, these could be things you could quickly share with students, or you could really dig into it. If you use the We the People text, there's a whole section that talks about social contract, and students can think about what it would be like if we lived in a state of nature and do some of those simulations. Or if you only have 20 minutes to teach it, you can just touch on it and then work yourself into the primary sources that we have in here. So one of the activities that we developed here is we want students to look at text-based primary sources, but we also understand that some of the more complex text-based primary sources are inaccessible to younger students. And so there's two things that happen here. We took an excerpt from the second treatise on government from John Locke, the one that talks about the idea of giving people authority in society. We modified it slightly. You can see that we did it with brackets, so it's clear to the teacher what's been changed. But what we did with this activity is we allowed for students to take a summary of that key idea and match it with the language that's a little bit more complex. So you can see here, they would cut those out and they would match. We did kind of a zoom up here on this, so you could actually take a second and take a look at this activity and see which idea actually fits with which summary. And so this gives students the opportunity to learn about it, but with the proper supports and scaffolding so that they can actually access the document. So this is another example of the types of hands-on activities, full participation methods, but also challenging primary source work. This isn't easy work for students, but it's a good extension for students to be able to really dig in and understand alongside the text, if you're using it, alongside the images and all of those other pieces.
All right. I just want to add to that too, that it's also a chance to scaffold success. I can successfully navigate difficult texts. And I think when we have elementary students set up so that they're successful, the next time they see one, they don't shut down, they dig in. And I think as we develop these, it's really like, how do we set up challenging activities and provide the supports that will allow students to be successful so that they will continue to do the deep thinking and deep work that's required long-term to do this. So as we move on to elaborate the next sources, okay, here we are. Here are our sources again, but now we have scenarios. We have things that they are likely to encounter in their day-to-day life that match with some of these images. So for instance, and you can feel free to shout out the number, if I were to say this source set has the authority, who's ever in this source set has the authority to tell children to turn off the television and go to bed so they get a good night's sleep. Oh, I see a solid 4. I see a solid 4. Absolutely right. We're looking at family groups. Whereas, this person has the authority to review students' work and make sure everyone is learning. We get a 2. And we get a 1 and a 1 and a 1. And I want to say to 2, I want to know more about it. We got a 3. And in the classroom, right, I'd say like, okay. And now, of course, the chat's moving so fast, I can't go back. I'd say, so you said 3. What makes you say that? What in the image of the crossing guard makes you want to connect to that? Because I think one of the most important things that we do as teachers working with students around primary sources is it's so easy to decide a student like, oh, they didn't pick the one I was thinking of. Yet I am always caught by surprise when I ask a student to explain their thinking. And many times the connection they have made and the rationale they have is solid. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about working with primary sources. So I think the one thing I would have everyone think about is keeping in your back pocket all the time the words, what makes you say that, what in the image makes you say that, what in the source makes you say that, because what we want to hear is what they're thinking. Because they might be right. And even if they're not, they're going to give us the clue and the trail of what they're thinking. And that's going to help us mend a misconception or an image that isn't clear or whatever else it is. And I think that's really exciting. And for students, this is a great chance. Again, I forget whose question it was early that Kelly answered. You could do this as a group. You could do this as individuals, depending on what best fits your classroom at that time. So after students work through this, they're going to now go back and probably independently, but maybe with a partner, depending on your grade, do some sort of assessment that gives them and you a chance to see where they are in this process. And in this case, you get a couple of choices. And in the first one, students are picking 3 images to explore deeply. And they're going to write them down and they're going to go back to those questions that we've been focusing on is who has authority? What role gives them that authority? And how does that person help society by using that authority? And, that's one approach. And a student is looking at 3 documents, but that might not be what every student in your classroom can do time-wise or ability-wise. Maybe you look at something with some sentence stems where the student takes one source and talks about how they're supposed to use their authority and what their role is and how they use it to help society. And then maybe they either draw or write more about how that person might help. I think this is a real benefit of when we can present resources in Google to make them accessible to our students who are new to English, for our students who have learning challenges, and focus not so much on the product as it looks, but much more on their actual understanding. Are they able to ask those questions? Are they able to understand the key concepts that have been presented? And how can we help them show that to us as teachers?
And just to add on to what Lori is saying here, because we started with the same set of images and they're ending with the same set of images, they've been able to revisit that so many times. And while maybe they don't get every single image and how it connects, by the end, students should be able to connect to one of those images and be able to really understand a complex concept. Authority is not an easy concept to understand, but imagine 3rd and 4th and 5th graders actually understanding what this means and that there's a difference between power and authority and that we're building a social contract and that's what the founders did and that's what the framers did when they wrote the Constitution. And as a matter of fact, they wrote about it 2,000 years ago, right? When they were the ancient Greeks and the Romans were writing about these things and just really being able to see these are enduring principles that are so important to the social contract, but through images that have woven through this entire inquiry. And students can hopefully at the end come back and really think about, okay, what did I think about doing this process? Did it help me understand? One of the things that I really emphasize in my own classroom, and I think when Lori and I and Kelly got together to think about this, is the concept of like metacognition, right? Like, how do I think about the way I'm thinking and learning? And how do I use that to create new skills and new schema right? Like connect and make new ideas that are going to be enduring ideas that I can take forward. And part of that is asking students to stop, like not rushing through the process, asking students to stop and really think about, oh, what did we just do here? Could we do this with another topic? And we've provided for you 4 different topics you can do it with. So if students do all 4 of these as you're teaching, right, and say you weave them through the year, by the time they get to justice, which I do think is the most complex of these lessons, they're going to be seasoned at doing inquiry work. And that is so cool because those are skills they can take into ELA, into art, into math, into science, into whatever they're doing, and thinking about volunteering in their community. This inquiry process is something that is so incredibly transferable. And that's why it's so exciting to have these foundational ways to do that in your classroom. And
And
so,
Kelly,
yes.
oh, I just wanted to add too, I think one of the other benefits of that, the touching point over and over again is also, if we think about all the kids in your classroom, if your kids who are like English learners, there's all that oral rehearsal. They're talking about this. They're hearing everybody else's idea. They're not only hearing their own thinking, they're hearing other people's. And so I think one of the values is that you get the collective knowledge of the class and they get that. And all throughout, you're also going back to connecting it to lived experiences, the things they're going to see at home, in the community, in the school. And that helps them apply these concepts, not just again to civic life out there, but civic life in your classroom and civic life in your school. And it's pretty exciting because they do make those connections.
And so now we've shown you essentially what the many of the elements of the authority lesson that we have. And so the other lessons follow a very similar model, but introduce students to new and different concepts, but they all have images. They all have an inquiry question. They all have ways in which you dig deeper. You apply it to students' lives. You learn new knowledge. You do scenarios. And then you come back to kind of presenting that claim at the end and processing. And so that gives you a window into it. And we do have a little bit of time, maybe 5 minutes or so, that we could take some questions that people have. And then Kelly will finish up for us for the evening. But we're wondering maybe these 3 things. Like, do you have any questions we could answer? Do you think this could enhance or deepen your lessons? And if so, share. And then, like, which one would you want to try first? We're just going to assume that you want to try them because we think they're amazing and you should love our spirit enough to just want to jump in. So what do you think?
I honestly love the model.
Thank
Chris,
you.
this is your 3rd PD for tonight too. So
Woo!
I appreciate that you're full in.
Yeah, it's one of the, well, part 2 grants, Epic and now Trails here in Kentucky, and would love to bring this to those 2.
That's awesome. Well,
Please
we
do.
really want you to share. We're excited about it. Oh, awesome. Tara says that they seem very accessible for her 4th graders. Christy says, I love this. I always get excited, but doing it all is a challenge, perhaps in January. And maybe it's just try one,
Yeah.
right? Like you can do one thing and then maybe next time you get bold and try the second. But the nice thing is you could really spread these out over the year.
Yeah.
And that I think is a nice option because they'll be able to come back to it.
And I'm going to encourage you too, like, even if it's just to take the baby step, even if it's just to do a portion of one day and a portion of one next. I think, when we paused and looked at that, sort of slide of what would happen if no one followed the rules, you could spend some time there and really develop that community of inquiry in your classroom.
And Jennifer, I'm totally on page with you here. I'm a high school teacher, and these are really help my students access complex issues and complex ideas, but in a way that is respectful to them as learners and their entry point. So I think you'll find it to be really accessible.
Nice. Oh, Belinda, I really, you know, that's what we hope. Non-threatening to students, right? We want everyone to engage. We don't want anyone to think they can't be a part of these discussions and learn about these things. And so when we begin with that open inquiry, it really lets everybody enter in a way that they can be successful.
And Rochelle, 100% you can use it with community organizations. I mean, you could use these with adults, to be honest with you. You know, you think about doing some norm setting for committees and things that you might be on, might be a fun way to
Yeah.
engage
Mm.
people.
When
Oh,
we
I
So
put
love
these
Leslie's idea.
together, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
When we were putting these together, we discussed the idea of whether we should have every lesson be individual and be its own idea, or should there be some sort of pattern? And we agreed that we loved the idea of there be a pattern, so that when you were, launching the first one, you may do more supporting at the
Mhm.
first time through. And then the students have developed some of those muscle memory, right? Like, oh, I know when
It
you hand
is
me a set of
muscle.
images, this is what I have to go do with, I have to do a close read with these images, and they might get out their magnifying glass, or,
Yeah.
they're partnering, trioing up and having these discussions. So we loved the idea that this followed a pattern throughout all 4 lessons. They're not all exactly alike, but there
Yeah.
are things there that students will remember. Oh, okay, this is what I do when I'm going to have this conversation in my group with each other.
And then
yeah.
hopefully as a teacher, you can lean into those skills and you can then assume they have that skill and use it in other things that you're doing. And I mean, I think that that's the goal, right? Is to build those skills so that they can use them over and over again.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing people say like they're excited to make, help make things more fun, that access for ELs, right?
Yeah.
Like students that are really, they're so visual, that and different scenarios and settings that students will be able to recognize, but also scenarios that students won't be able to recognize, none of them. And that's also kind of fun. It's like, what is this rotary telephone? So that I think is also really fun, and moving them up into middle and high school is also really great.
Yeah.
Um,
And truthfully, some of the inquiry work Kelly and I have done together, we've used literally the exact same lesson with a kindergarten classroom, an upper elementary, her high school kids, and my college students. And you can use the same inquiry and it self-differentiates. The questions they have are different, their observations are different, but they can still all get there. And that's really kind of fun. So we really do encourage you to try it as it fits.
yeah, and
I'm
plus
really excited that you guys have done all this research on the photos. Thank you so much, because I'm a special educator, so I'm always searching and always using. And some of the things that I was thinking when I was doing this in terms of scaffolding, I also happen to teach high school theater, but this is my lower school is theater arts and or social studies, and is exactly what you were mentioning about the phone. Is that I probably would try to find some tangible, they wouldn't be from that time period, but props, if you will. I was also thinking it would be fun for my students and it would help them. You had that great vocabulary graphic organizer that if they practice using those voices, if they did a tableau of what that looks like, so that it's in their voice and their bodies too, to help mesh that rather than just looking at the image. My students will need that other
yeah.
level, but you guys have done like all of the research for me. So what a gift. So
No.
thank you.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
turning
Yeah,
those into tableaus is a blast. The images
um,
from so I'm
and
with
I
you on
think
that one.
you could pair these with any of your curriculum that you see an overlap. It really just is going to pair really well with any government or civics curriculum that you're doing. I know somebody asked about it specifically with the Constitution Center. I think you could. I think you could pair it with all kinds of lessons and texts. Like I mentioned before, the We the People text is a great pair at all 3 levels, really, with these 4 lessons, but you could also pair it with other things. I do not use
You don't
GPT
either.
with my students, but I'm sure there are folks that do. And I
As
just
far
want to read
as,
this.
as
Go
far
ahead,
as the
Kelly.
pairing, I will just give a little plug. All of our lessons are aligned with standards, not only with our We the People, as Kelly just mentioned, but also with the C3 model and EAD. So we have aligned with every possible standard out there. And we would love you to explore how they can match with our We the People textbook.
And those
Yeah.
are listed in the lesson plan. You will find that information.
So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and let Kelly kind of conclude for us. And then I know we certainly can stay for a few minutes if people have individual questions at the end. So and we hope Chris says
Oh,
he's
we
going to
hope.
add it
Thank
to his
you, Chris.
curriculum map tomorrow. Good work. I like that.
All right. Well, we are so blessed to have two master teachers with us tonight to have delivered this amazing professional learning for you. And we are extremely grateful for the educators that have found the hour to be with us. We know you have much pulling at your time. And the fact that you made this a priority means a great deal to us. We are sharing again. These are the lessons available to you in the Google format. I do want to just make a quick mention to you that when we planned these lessons, we decided to write as if this was for a brand new first year, very little experience social studies teacher, because we thought the more we could provide, the better. And so, you as an experienced person might get in there and say, I don't need some of this. That's okay. We don't mind. But we've also heard people say, hey, I could use this as a sub plan. This is so detailed. I could leave this for the substitute. So you'll notice that there are spots there where we talk about how do we use the universal design for learning. We give suggestions for that. What do we do for our multilingual learners? We provide suggestions there. What do we do? I've got extra time on my hands, which is very rare for social studies. But if you do, how can I extend this learning? So we've built all of that into the lesson. So when you get in to these lesson plans, you will find very detailed instructions along with all the resources that go along with these lessons.
And the final version of Justice is coming soon, correct?
Yep, somebody already just
So-
said, I only see 3.
Yeah.
Michelle,
So-
you're good.
Justice is in its
Nice point,
final
Mike.
stages of editing, and so that will be coming soon, but will be in this folder. So if you bookmark,
Absolutely.
if you star the folder in your Google Drive, then it will magically appear.
It'd be like a
It'll be
holiday
like a
gift.
gift. Yeah.
Okay, if you have enjoyed this session and you'd like to know more about professional learning here at the Center for Civic Education, we have 2 programs that are running. There's summer institutes, but then they also run with professional learning throughout the school year. And I will drop those links in the chat for you. Our Civics That Empowers All Students program is across all 50 states plus DC, and that focuses primarily on 4th to 8th grade educators, and that's working with our civics curriculum, We the People textbook, as we mentioned, and our Project Community is another flagship program we didn't have a chance to share with you tonight, but that is starting to launch with some specific sites this summer. And if you are interested in learning about public policy for your students and media literacy, that is the place for you. So feel free to check those out. If you loved coming together for a webinar, the center has another webinar next week. We just can't get enough webinaring in December, apparently. So this one happens to deal with the Electoral College, which we know can be a very hot topic. This is a partnership that we have with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and you are welcome to jump in and register for that session coming up on December the 12th. All right. And we want to thank you for everything that you do to lift up civic education. We are grateful for you. The QR code there is just this link to the center so that you can reach us. And my email there. We are thrilled that you have joined us this evening. You really have made us some very happy educators here. And thank you for your time. I'm going to stop recording, but you're welcome to stay on and we can catch some questions if anyone has questions for our master teachers. Thank you so much.